Hey, man. Oh, I don't have volume yet. You're
Sorry
still
about
on
the
mute.
lateness. Sorry
Oh,
about
there
that.
you go. That's all right. How you doing?
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the lady that I have been doing talks with the podcast movement when I've been over.
Mm.
Um, she approached me to help her. She's setting up a course. And one of the things we were looking at was so many courses for podcasting that are out there. I just make a podcast quickly, a podcast challenge, make a load of money from podcasting. And we just kind of felt it's losing all the joy and wonder of podcasting. And
Yeah.
so one of the things we're doing is just building up a library of just conversations with people that actually, just make podcasts and enjoy it. And it's just that kind of, capturing the passion.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So I've got two angles on this because I do make personal podcasts for myself, but I also make podcasts for a living for other people. So I think I've got a good. I've had lots of exposure to both worlds. You know, the passion project versus the paid project. Um, and I read a lot of podcast forums, on Reddit and Facebook, and I see people, they really do jump the gun a lot and go, how can I make money out of this podcast? This is going to be my side gig. But it's like, I have very strong opinions around people building skills before they actually try to sell anything. Podcasting is a skill. Hosting is a skill that you not only have to have a little bit of natural talent, you have to work on it, and you have to work on it every day, and you have to refine your skills until you get to the point where you can just do a show and it's entertaining, and you can go back and listen and refine your skills even more. And I think people who haven't been exposed to it and all of a sudden think they're going to make money off their side gig, honestly, kidding themselves. There's also a world full of sharks out there trying to sell you like transcription, and you need this program to supplement your social media. And actually, it's everything but the podcast. And I think that people really need to realize that when you're making a podcast, the only thing you should focus on to begin with is making a good podcast. That's it. Don't worry about money. Don't worry about transcriptions. Don't worry about fancy social media stuff. Just get a good product. Because if you get a good product, people will actually bother to go into a podcast app, search for your thing, and hit subscribe. That's the best way to do it, is my opinion. Yeah.
and well, you're talking about making a good product. Yeah, are we saying that something that's possibly, I don't know, like shortlisted by Apple as a podcast of the year? Like, isn't that what happened to
So
you?
yeah. So my podcast last year was shortlisted by Apple as one of the best of the year in Australia. And I think the reason behind that is because I didn't just focus on the content. I focused on, and you would relate to this, I'm sure, Ant, um, how the actual content sounds. And I think people who, uh, most people don't actually pay much attention to their sound at all. They're like getting on Reddit and they're like, who can someone give me some free music to chuck at the beginning of my show? And for me, that's just rubbish. Like, your whole program should have, uh, it should be directed like a film, and you really should be placing sounds where they need to go. And if it's just talking, that's fine, but you really do need to make sure that you're editing in a way where you're putting the breaths in the right place, you're taking the right things out, you're leaving the right ums and ahs in. And that's what I think everyone's approach to making content should be. It should actually, your passion should be flowing right into the content. And that's, I love the fact that you guys are focusing on this, because if you let it, the podcast will take over your whole entire life. And that's why there's only 5 episodes of McHugh, and because it did take over my whole entire life, and I just didn't have any time for anything else. And so that's why, future episodes are on hold until I have some time to do it.
How do you learn which is the right breath and which is the right to delete and the right to leave in? Is
Well,
that just
I
an
think it's
instinctive thing?
subjective. It's absolutely subjective, but you have to remember that words and the way people talk carry much more than the information of just the word. Like the way things are said, the way they're delivered. You really, when you're editing someone else, you really get a good insight into their personality. And maybe I'm wacky for thinking this, but I spend a lot of time editing other people's voices, and I think, oh wow, this guy's actually a bit fake. Like he's putting this on the whole time. This is bullshit. Or you might go, oh, actually, this guy has a big heart. He's funny, but if you actually listen to what he's saying more closely, he's a lot nicer than people think. And I think you can actually, it's almost like an amateur psychology degree editing other people. And that's where you can actually, I think the more passion you put into that content, I don't know, audio seems really psychological to me anyway. And that's why radio salespeople are always talking about passive listening and, how the best form of advertising is audio because it goes straight into the back of people's heads. So, and I know what I'm saying is all over the place, but I think it does all rope in together. Your passion, the psychology of audio, it all sort of, I don't know. I think people really need to get a grasp on what that is before they, start venturing onto big projects where they think they're going to sell their podcast.
Yeah, I think you're completely right with that, and I don't think you're going all over the place so much. But I'm just my two things with. First of all, you're saying about the psychology of it, and I'm thinking absolutely, because also this is something that's a relatively new invention for us as a species. The ability to not just broadcast to every person on the planet, but also to capture that audio and listen back to it again and again and slow it down and take those words and that detail. And so it's almost like a CSI type analysis of somebody's conversation and every word and inflection and those kinds of things that we can do. So I can get that the psychology of it and how you can start to get to know somebody, although it does sound like crazy obsessive.
Yeah, well, it probably is partly crazy and obsessive. But yeah, exactly.
And but then at the same time, on the flip side of that, I know that so many people, especially at the beginning of their journey, they're really worried about the sound of their voice. They're really worried that they sound, and I don't know if this is a thing that's common to other people, but whenever I hear my voice back, it feels flat. Even now that I'm really sort of giving it, like it's first thing in the morning, we're on this call, I'm giving it the energy. I'm going to listen back to it and go, I sound tired. I've not drank enough. I've not slept enough. And I just sound like I should have been stood up. I should have been going to, and
so, I have that too. And I always, but for me, it's not that I sound flat. For me, it's that I sound like the Pink Panther or like, there's like a certain 1970s campness in my voice, which is not, the macho guy that I want to be. And I think everyone has that same cringe factor with their own voice. And the reality is you just need to get past that because people love personalities. They don't want you to be the deep McDonald's voiceover guy. They want you to be you. And so I think people do need to get past that awkwardness as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I just had this image then of you trying to live up to the macho-ness that you think you have in your voice by like having a tinny and also doing a weightlifting in one hand. Well,
and eating your sausage roll. Yeah.
So you talked about like people coming along and instantly going, I want to make money from my podcast. I want to start. And I've had that as well. And people, especially during this period of lockdown where people's careers have gone. And I do know people that have turned it around, the people that have broken all the rules that I think are there and have had success with what they're doing. But I know a lot more people that haven't, that a lot more people have gone, I'm going to do this. And actually what they've done is they've it's cost them money. because they've gone out and bought lots of expensive equipment and given up because it's not worked. But what's interesting for me about you is not only have you made podcasts that sound great, that are your passion, but you also make a living from making podcasts for other people. So my question is, how long did it take you to get to this position in terms of, just to give a base level for that? Because obviously you've got to learn the skills before people will hire you to do the job for them.
Yeah. It's going to be hard to answer this question without maybe being like giving you a bio, because my whole career has been around audio. I was a really bad kid at high school.
How
I
bad?
spent more time in the hallway. I wasn't violent or anything. I was just, busy smoking cigarettes and pot in the park rather than caring about exams. I spent a lot of time in the hallway at school. Anyway, so I didn't get into the university degree that I wanted to. So the way I did get in was by learning to make music, electronic music, with the computer. And I ended up, I was working in a coffee shop in an area where there were lots of media houses. And I used to just try and charm all of them. And eventually one of them was like, all right, you want to make music for an ad? Go for it. Here's the project. And I did. And I ended up making, music for this Telstra, which is our biggest phone company in Australia, for this ad.
Wow.
And I was like, I got paid, $50 or something, very tokenistic. But the way I did manage to cash in on that was by, what do you call it? By lodging an application with with UTS, University of Technology Sydney, with this example of me making music for Telstra, and somehow that landed me a spot in doing a degree at UTS. So that degree focused on media, arts and production, so digital production. All of my subjects were audio, and all of the actual academic subjects that I had to do, I turned them into audio subjects by making music pieces that went with essays and, writing essays about audio ecology and stuff like this instead of actually doing the syllabus.
This sounds like something from a 90s sitcom where like the kids do a rap in a science lesson and get an A.
Yeah. It was kind of like that. The rap was definitely there. The cheesy rap. Yeah. So, and then I actually went into working in radio. So I wanted to be a radio host. And, that sort of didn't go anywhere. So I ended up being in the background of radio studios. And then when I heard about podcasting, I was like, oh, wow, this is my opportunity to get back behind the microphone. And so I think around 2010, I started making my own podcast. And after that, I actually started working for a full-time for a podcast called Mysterious Universe in around 2016.
Wow.
And I think I was very hated by their audience, which is hilarious. They still bitch about me on Reddit now.
What did you do?
I just, because it was two guys that had built a fandom around them.
Yeah.
I didn't really click with one of them very well, who, by the way, we were talking about annoying voices. He has the most annoying voice on the planet, and people love him. So if people are worried about their annoying voice, forget about it. It's all good. And then so after that, I actually went back to working in radio for a bit, but then took an opportunity working for Channel 9, which is a television network company here, and they needed a podcast producer, and I made all of their podcasts for a couple of years. Which was a very, very busy job. And now I'm here a few years later. So, I mean, it's been a lot of work to get to have to be able to work full time as a podcast producer the way I am. But I know lots of people who have, finished uni and gone straight into it. So, but they're not working for themselves. They're working for a production house. But yeah, you need to put in the time is basically the answer.
So
the LDR is put in a hell of a lot of time editing, practicing talking, doing stupid voices, go do community radio and use their facilities as much as you can if you don't have any money to buy your own gear. And then once you're ready to, invest, under $1,000 on a mixing desk and mics and stuff, go for it.
So on that, just let's quickly sort of pull that out. Is there a piece of equipment that is your kind of, maybe you don't even use it anymore, but in your time, what's your thing that you always have with you that you always feel confident having, even if it's just as a backup?
Oh, can I say two?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first one is just a Zoom recorder, a portable Zoom recorder.
Yeah, I want to write it on the shelf.
Yeah, either an H4n, H5, H6. Don't go below that. They're probably not the best recorders, but they're so sturdy. You could drop one down the stairs and it'll survive. So a Zoom. The other thing is, and I didn't want to like these when they first came out because it felt like they were just suckering podcasters into buying stuff. But the Rodecaster Pro is amazing. I recommend it to anyone who wants to start up a little podcast and try and record it like a live radio show, or try out the Rodecaster Pro. I think it's a terrific piece of gear.
Although you have to press the record button twice, which is a mistake that I fell into.
So I don't actually record into the Rodecaster. I always connect it to a laptop.
Right. So I used it in a studio over in Sheffield at Rebel Mace Media, and I'd just been at an event and somebody was there that I wanted to speak to, and they were like, you can use our studio, and they had it set up and said, just hit record. And thankfully I had my Zoom with me, which I set up as a backup recording with the and at the end of the interview they said, we'll email it over to you. And basically all the recording was sort of 3 minutes of us going, well, that was really good, wasn't it? I'm leaving the studio.
Because when you hit stop, right?
Yeah, exactly. So on that level, like, has there been like an epic mistake that you've made along the way? Because obviously, you must be pretty good at what you're doing, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it now. But I'm imagining that somewhere along the way, you've either had that kind of mistake in an interview, or you've uploaded something that you shouldn't have.
So you know what? I have made so many massive mistakes. To pinpoint one is hard, because a lot of the time for me, my mistakes are usually putting my foot in my mouth, like saying the wrong thing or losing my temper at the wrong person. So, so the best thing I can think of the top of my head is actually when I was a breakfast radio host in the countryside, and there's lots of funny things when you're in the countryside. You sort of have to do everything because you're there in the station by yourself in the early morning till about 9 o'clock when everyone else starts. So things like, when you need to have a crap, for example, you need to pick a song that's the right length of time, and then you need to actually like have a timer on your watch, like keeping an eye on the time. This sort of stuff always happens. But one thing that happened to me was I left the mic on while I can't remember what I was doing. And then I turn around and I go, I spilt my coffee, and I go, fuck. And then I look and the fucking microphone's on. So I've just broadcasted that across, and this is a radio station that, and it's not massive, but it goes across like 3 local towns. Yeah. So let's sort of 30,000, 50,000 people. And no one ever really mentioned it to me or said anything. But, there would have been some farmer there that was like, had a bad morning, did we, Dan?
I'm desperate to know what the song was that was playing when you did that.
You know, it's because Country Town, you can get away with playing some oldies. Stairway to Heaven was a good number
Right.
for putting on for when you went for a number one. Yeah.
So you could have always argued it was just like a bootleg remix of it. It was recorded live, and that was
Yeah,
the guitarist screaming over the top.
yeah, I could have argued that, but I don't think anyone would have believed me.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. What I really like about just talking to you now, and though we've met before and obviously clicked in terms of what we do, it's really nice to have that balance of obviously you're living the dream for a lot of people right now in terms of what you're doing, in terms of you're fully immersed in the podcast world. Yet to get there, you've kind of like had so many points at which you could have gone, okay, I take this as a sign from the universe, I'm giving up. You know, like just things have gone wrong.
Yeah,
You've
and
hit
there
walls.
have been lots of those points. Yeah, there have been so many of those points where, you know, even when I came back from the countryside, trying to get a job in radio in the city felt near impossible because I didn't have any connections. I didn't have an inroad. You know, even the way I left my job in the countryside wasn't the most amicable.
Was it after the coffee fuck?
No. You know, I actually gave notice, and then they asked me to stay an extra month longer so someone could have a holiday, and then that month turned into 6 weeks, and then, you know, and basically one of the other radio announcers, you know, tried to act tough towards me, and because I've just got this Michael J. Fox from Back to the Future thing in the back of my psyche that's like, you know, if someone calls me chicken, you know, so I was like, buddy, if you want to have a fight, let's just go outside and have a fight. And then they asked me not to come back in there ever again, you know, so so, you know, I've made lots and lots of huge, stupid mistakes. The one thing that you hear, you know, when you hear actual successful people talking, the one thing they talk about is perseverance. So if you really want something, you just keep going for it. And, you know, I don't know if I've achieved a dream. I'm not Joe Rogan. I do edit lots of corporate, you know, podcasts where they talk about the fine intricacies of, you know, data management.
Thrilling.
But you so maybe also people's dream of being a full-time podcast producer is not always exactly what you think it's going to be either. Yeah.
And in doing this, obviously you still got a time to well, you've got McUniverse, which got a lot of rave reviews and critical acclaim, I suppose you could call it, by getting that shortlist from Apple. Do you find now one of the problems that you have is because you're making a living from doing the podcasting, you don't have enough podcast energy left for your own passion projects?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely the case. That and having a baby have definitely got in the way of making McUniverse. But I actually have to say, so I may be someone that switches on and off with my own personal projects a bit anyway, which I think, you know, lots of people are, and that's why you have terms like pod fade. But actually with McUniverse, around the same time as my work getting really, really busy, I started working on an episode which involved a man's he's basically an alien experience, or he you know, he had some form of contact, and his story was really compelling, and I believed him. I went to his house, and he's a, you know, a very normal sort of Aussie, you know, bloke who's just had a threesome with aliens. But other than that, he's very normal. But then I interviewed the scientist. So he actually you know, had a sample from the alien, which was a hair, very, very much a human hair. And he had a scientist analyze the hair. And this is back in the 90s. So, you know, the science is actually there, but there's not a lot of, you know, when you're tracking human genes, you actually need lots of samples from lots of different humans to actually be able to track it down. So they did track this hair down to Asia and whatever. I had someone else check all of the data to make sure that it was legit. But I also kept an eye on this scientist's Twitter, and he's just full of shit. And it totally put me off finishing that episode, and my work took off. So there was a whole balance of, to get the McHughverse episodes right, there needs to be a balance of, entertaining an idea, finding some sort of science you can relate to it, then coming out with some sort of, middle ground approach to it.
Yeah.
And, when you have a very far out there idea of a dude, having sex with aliens and and then this scientist guy who, is absolutely full of shit. It just became too hard, and I was like, focus on my work. Let's come back to this later.
And is that something that you'll come back to, or is there a possibility?
Absolutely, because it's such a huge interview. And there is actually a book, like anyone who's into the Australian UFO scene would know exactly who I'm talking about. If you've ever seen the movie, I think what's it called? Is it called Contact?
Oh, with is it Michelle Pfeiffer or Jodie?
What's the one with Anthony Hopkins? Not Anthony Hopkins. Who's the guy that had a Christopher Walken? Hold on, let me use the old Google machine.
The Dead Zone was Christopher Walken.
No,
that's not Alien.
No.
That's Neil.
He plays a.
There's somebody screaming at us right now with the answer.
Communion.
Oh, didn't see that. No.
Okay, so Communion's quite funny because you've got Anthony Walken, who talks like this the whole time, who's meant to be playing this sensitive author. He's meant to be, in the role of an author who has this weird experience. The aliens definitely insert something in his butt at some stage. And it's just... Anyway, so that movie, a lot of the things that happen in that movie happen in this alien experience of the guy who I recorded. Right. That's why I'm talking about the movie. So it's huge. It's really an interesting story. There's no way that I can't come back to it eventually.
But with that, I think that that kind of echoes what you're saying in terms of the focusing on your craft and the creating that excellence almost, in that a lot of people come into it, and I still have people that listen to some things that I've done, and they don't have an appreciation for everything that happens around it. So they may be listen to like a 15-minute show that I've made and assume that took me 15 minutes to make.
Yeah. And your show is very production heavy as well, with sound effects and music. And
yeah, I mean, pretty much everything that I do. I find it very difficult to do something that isn't.
Yeah. I think I sent you an episode of an old radio play that's horrible that I used to make, which was not the same, but it definitely had the same approach of needing, lots of sound effects and music, and that stuff just takes hours and hours and hours and hours of editing. It takes a lot of time.
So how do you balance that? Because there's always an element of you can always polish something. Like if I listen back to something that I produced a couple of months ago, a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah.
I'll always think I could have done that. I missed a beat there that needed space to breathe. But at some point you have to go and let it, especially when you're working for a client, they have a deadline, you've got to deliver it. But when it's your own thing, you can constantly tweak on it, constantly redo bits, constantly add things to it. At which point do you go, that'll do, pig, that'll do, to quote Babe, the movie?
So I think that's an impossible question to answer, really. For me, it would just really depend on what mood I was in at the time.
Okay.
And also for me, usually I'll pick. I'll pick pockets to concentrate on. So, for example, the intro for each episode, I would spend hours on, and it was just music, and it was just be like panning stuff and using. There's a Sennheiser program called Ambio, so you can make it actually. You can give the sound 3-dimensional space. Mucking around with stuff like that, and in a very unnecessary way, spending way too much time on it. But I guess I would just sort of compartmentalize my obsessive audio refining to certain parts of the show rather than doing the whole show, if that makes sense. Because you could spend a week on 10 seconds of audio if you wanted to.
Absolutely. I mean, what's just give me an example of that. What's the longest period of time you spent on a very small section of a show?
Oh, I think what I've just told you with the panning of the, I even got some of the SBS, which is an Australian broadcaster that incorporates, foreign language translations of the news and that sort of stuff. So I got, the Tamil announcer to announce that this program contains content that may not be suitable for young people. And and it's every intro I will do that differently. And I'll layer the voices and I'll put harmonics in and I spend way too much time on that 10 seconds of audio that no one would appreciate at all. Absolutely. And so you've got to realize that it's for your own enjoyment than anyone else's.
I think so we just wrapped after 5 years. We put the show you mentioned of mine on the left side. We've wrapped that and put it, but you triggered something then when you were two things in fact. So we did a final ever episode of On the Left Side, just to kind of like say goodbye, and the introduction for that kind of happened by accident, because what we did was we approached everybody who'd done a voice throughout the time and said, look, will you do a little voice note for us of your favorite memory or your favorite bit that you did, and then we can incorporate it. And one of the more recent voiceovers we started working with, who was so dynamic and so brilliant, so many different voices, he did this little memory of like 30-40 seconds about his favorite bits and what he loved and how he said it was going. And then he said, oh, I've had this idea as well, and did this incredible David Attenborough voice talking about how the show was coming to an end, but in doing so, it would break down over the internet and allow other podcasts to grow in its space. And it was just marvelous. And so because of that, now the final episode of our football comedy podcast opens like it's a David Attenborough, Planet Earth, Blue Planet, one of those things. So we have like, there's whale sound on, there's babies crying, there's just the whole, and literally that introduction is a minute. And I think it took me 6 weeks to make it. Because I kept coming back to it and going, meow, meow, and then that whale doesn't sound happy enough. Hang on.
Does that include the recording of the various voices from the different people?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of waiting for things. It was more from the initial idea to sort of that bit being finished, because as bits came in, they were factored in or put in. It's a very organic process in that way. But it's ridiculous. But you were talking about the dynamic sound, and so for the last episode, I came from back behind the scenes to actually being on the microphone, and so me and the host had a chat about things that we'd done and things that we really enjoyed in between little memories and little sketches. And one of the things I was talking about was how after we'd been doing the show for about two years, I think, I started to play on the name, because the show was called On the Left Side. And so I panned all of Jim, the host's vocals, onto the left side. Right. And so, and so when you listen to the show, he's always on the left headphone. And then I then panned all the other voices onto the right-hand side, not by a lot, No, like we're talking
Yeah,
maybe
like
by
11.
eight,
Yeah.
-8, -9 dB either side, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of going that
Yeah.
way. And I thought this was almost like a signature, like a watermark on the show, just a kind of a
Yeah.
very sort of thing. And in the whole time that we've done it, I've maybe had 3 or 4 people, you being one of them, and I appreciate it, coming and saying to me, the production's really good. I really like it. It must take you a long time. Yeah. And although it's kind of nice that people listen to it and it doesn't sound overworked, they just kind of, they flow with it. Anyway, so the guy that I host with, the guy that hosted the show for me, when I said this in the show, he was like, "Did you?" And he was like, "Oh, that explains it." And so he used to listen back to the show while he was at work on one headphone. And
So
and
quiet.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and so he'd always complain and say, "No, it's a bit quiet. You know, the levels are all over the place." And so I spent all this time creating this dynamic universe where the sound moves around you,
Yeah,
and
he's
because
got
he was,
one ear button.
he was just listening like that. He didn't.
Yeah. He's disrespecting the audio, Mr. McGinley. That would probably upset me. But I also think, so if people listening now are interested, you should probably play us that intro now.
Okay, that's perfect. There's the producer always thinking, yeah, we can put that in for sure. Dan, look, I know you've got dinner. I know it's the other side of the world, so it's morning for me. It's an evening for you. It's been really nice just for me personally having this chat and this catch up with you, but also I think it's been really valuable, and thank you for being so open and honest and sharing your passion.
You're welcome. I hope someone gets something out of it.
Well, obviously they're going to get that all great podcasters have surnames that begin with MC.
Yeah, absolutely.